All right. See, it would get rid of that. Descript would get rid of it. Anyway, Sarey, I don't know how to say your last name. Concepcion, is that right?
Good enough for me.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not right. We did it.
Concepcion. Yeah, Concepcion.
Absolutely.
You did good.
I'm not going to do that again. Not even going to try. And Dan, Coke, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having
I'm
us.
glad that y'all both made time. From what I understand, you're in like different states. So we're now international, intercontinental. That's the word.
We're committing. If we commit crimes, they're federal crimes because we're crossing state lines.
I I guess so. So, Sarah, let's start with you. Dan's been on the show before, and so for lazy people like myself, I'll just put something in the show notes. You can hear about Dan's stuff, and you can
Perfect.
kind of abbreviate that, Dan, for the first time that they've opened the Dan door. But Sarah, people that are new to your voice or new to your,
Yeah.
yeah, who are you? What are you? The things.
I'm just a lady living in Portland, Oregon. Um, I'm from Los Angeles and I just moved to Portland, Oregon a few months ago with my husband and a 1-year-old baby girl. And I had uh, a long like first career in the entertainment business, music industry, and film industry before just deciding to leave it all behind and get a seminary degree. So I actually worked for Rob Zombie for many years, if people
Mm,
know who that is, working on horror films and heavy metal, and then decided to go to seminary. So I have a very contrasting chapters in my life. Went to Fuller Seminary, got a master's in theology, and then ended up working there for a while. And I recently started working for a nonprofit doing communications for them. My nonprofit does grant work at the intersection of faith and science. And my side hustle is this website I do with Dan
yeah.
called SoYourDeconstructing.com, which we're going to talk about on the show tonight. And I also have another side hustle of being kind of a filmmaker and a writer. So
What do you actually like to do? Like, if you could pick one of those and you're doing that
I
all
am
weekend alone, that's
I
it.
think I entered seminary sort of hoping to be like an edgy C.S. Lewis, where I would do both. Like I'd write about theology and I'd also write like my sci-fi, genre fiction on the side. So I am doing both those things. I just hold it down with a day job. So I say I equally love like
Huh.
I'm a theology nerd and I'm also like a sci-fi horror nerd as well. So
That is fantastic.
I can't really get around doing both.
Huh. Huh.
Yeah.
Dan, what is the abridged version for yourself?
I just have to say that SoYourDeconstructing.com is a pretty bad side hustle, given that all it does is cost us money and not earn any money.
That's a good clarification.
We pay for hosting and then we spend our time promoting it, and it does not earn a dollar. So I guess it's everyone else's side hustle on their behalf that you're doing it. So the abridged version of my story, Seth, is that I was in a rock and roll band called Sherwood for 10 years,
Mhm.
and then finished that, went back to school, finished my philosophy undergrad, took some time off, composed advertising music basically since then for the last 8 years or so, and started theology podcasting about 5 years ago,
Mhm.
and then started a doctoral degree in psychology about a year and a half ago. And I host the You Have Permission podcast. And I met Sarey through a very fun 2 week seminar at Fuller Seminary a year and a half ago called Theopsych, which was about science and religion. And I was there as a media person. She invited me because of the podcast, and we became friends. And eventually started working on this site together.
Yeah. So I want to get to the site. I spent some time in it, though I want to be really clear, not a massive amount of time in it, because I
That's
don't
fine.
spend a massive amount of time really anywhere except for at work. And currently Canvas and Google Classroom as I ensure that my
Right.
children actually submit their coursework because of COVID. But I am curious, what is a holy fawn? And I'm aware that many people listening have no idea what your shirt says, but I can't stop wondering.
Oh, it's a band. Yeah, they're
Okay.
kind of like a
It's always a band.
shoegazy and heavy band that I like a lot.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. So you're deconstructing. why? Like, what is the reason to make a repository of, I guess, resources is the best way that I would use it.
Yeah.
And maybe you have that in the website, and maybe I stole those words. I don't think I did.
Yeah, it's resources mainly.
Yeah. So what's the purpose there? Like, what made the two of you get together and say, all right, this needs to exist in the world?
Well, I will start just because it started with a tweet of mine, and then Sarey can fill in the meat because she's better at that than I am. I do. Are you familiar, Seth, with the movement "It Gets Better"?
No.
Okay, so it's like I don't know how to describe it. If it's maybe it's technically an organization now, but it was kind of like a slogan at one point for like gay teenagers, and it was like older gay people started this thing called "It Gets Better," basically like, hey, this is a rough time. We know you feel ostracized. It gets better. You're not going to feel this way all through your adulthood. And I jokingly tweeted one day, it gets better, but for former evangelicals or deconstructing Christians or something like some joke like that. And then, like, I think later that day, I replied to my own tweet going, hey, actually, maybe this is kind of a good idea. And then Sarey was like, I think it's a good idea. If you actually want to do that, I would like to do it with you. And I said, I would love to do it with you. Then I'll actually do it. And that began it. So then what did it become, Sarey? You can explain better than me.
Yeah, we just wanted to make a curated group of resources for people who were in that space of newly deconstructing and having gone through it ourselves and having a lot of friends who've been through it. It seemed like something that was needed. Seems like a lot of times when you start deconstructing, you might hear of something that sounds like an answer to a question, and that leads you to another something and another voice. So we thought it'd be helpful to have like a lot of that stuff in the same place. So, the meat of our site, a lot of it is in the topics page where we break it down by issues that are usually pretty salient for people who are in that beginning phase of deconstruction. But we have other stuff too. We have resources about, figuring out if you should go to therapy, and if you want to go to therapy, how do you go about finding a therapist? And what does it look like to find a community if you're feeling ostracized from your old church community or whatever. So sort of treating it holistically. I think Dan brings a lot of that therapeutic kind of voice. He really championed the therapy section of the website because he's a budding doctoral fella.
I'm a doctoral fella, which is a
not
joke.
fellow.
There's this thing in academia called being a doctoral fellow or a postdoctoral fellow, and I'm not that. I'm not a fellow, but I am a fella. And
I thought fellows were like just medical doctors. I thought those were fellowships, right?
I think in different disciplines, fellow means different things. But it's definitely an academic thing that I'm poking fun at. So I'm just a doctoral fella, But
anyway.
I'm training to be a therapist. Yes,
he's training to be a therapist is what I was trying to say.
And so that part was important for me, and I think that there also it turned out to be kind of a cool way to answer a question that I get all the time anyway, unrelated to the kind of topics page of like, there's questions about hell and the Bible and science and LGBTQ issues and all that. Sort of separate from that, people often ask like, how do I find a therapist who knows what I'm going through as like a person for whom faith is part of what I want to talk about in therapy? Some sort of wounding, some sort of transition, maybe difficulty with family members because of a faith change, or oftentimes within a marriage, an imbalance of faith change. And so that was actually kind of a cool opportunity to think through that. And Sarey was able to ask a couple professors from Fuller, and I was able to ask a couple people that I trust on sort of like, how would you best describe like going about that? And it turns out there are some pretty cool ways to do it. And so we have a little, for instance, a little tutorial of how to find someone on psychologytoday.com, which is the biggest directory of therapists in America who specializes in spirituality. I didn't know that was a thing until I started looking through this to try and answer that question.
I didn't know that was a thing until you just said that, because again, right. I was honest enough to tell you. I did not.
Well, that's very, the therapy page is a bit more of like a lot of text for people who are really considering something, and I wouldn't have expected you to find that
Yeah.
on a cursory look.
Yeah. Well, just side tangent, because therapy is a triggering topic for my family lately. So we've tried to find therapists
Mm,
for different reasons that I'm not going to put on this podcast, at
Yeah,
least not for
sure.
right now. And I've never been so infuriated by a system as
Mm.
the lack of qualified, at least therapy in what we were looking for.
Mm.
And one person actually refused to be in network and had like a cover charge that was so high it was more than my mortgage just to get care. And I was like, you realize you're price fixing.
ugh.
Um,
Wow.
you're price fixing to rich people to get medical attention here, and this is not right. Anyway, soapbox
Yeah.
for the day. But you said that, and so I am going to go to that resource. Um, but yeah, that's been my thing for the last few months. I'm just pissed at the world about that.
By the way, one of the cool things about the world of psychology, I'm sure it's true in other like medical fields, is there are these ethics boards, and if you think that someone really is price gouging or price fixing, you should report them to if they're a doctor, to the APA, if not like your state medical licensure or whatever, and
Mhm.
because it's a violation of the ethical code that we agree to.
They're probably not breaking any laws, but that's how I felt. Like I literally,
Sure.
as a banker, which is what I do, I was like,
Yeah.
this feels like
Well,
redlining, and I
yeah.
know that's illegal.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so Sarah, do you think that deconstructing is a necessary evil of having faith of any sort, not necessarily a Christian
Oh,
faith, but
great
just
question.
period?
Um, I I'm not going to speak with a great level of expertise to that question, but I think part of becoming an adult is deconstructing whatever you were raised with. So I think that pretty much everyone has to go through that phase of like owning what they were given.
Mm,
And from my experience, from what we're seeing right now, it seems like that's happening a lot, where people are ending up really far from where they started. And it can be, and not just like, not just moving the needle like, oh, I'm a little more liberal than my parents, it's like completely being like, nah, baby's got to go with the bathwater, see ya,
yeah.
so and that's part of the website that I tried to emphasize kind of throughout, especially in the topics area on the homepage and the messaging. It was really huge for me to learn about the breadth of the Christian tradition. And there's not a lot of literacy about that, I feel like. The rich history of the Christian tradition, what the history is like, thought leaders outside of a certain narrow, succession of, Calvin to Edwards to, Gospel Coalition, like there's a lot of other branches on the tree. And that's really exciting and refreshing to me. If we can get outside of the in-group, out-group thinking of certain creed, a certain denomination, and just see what the breadth of the tradition has to offer. I think it's really exciting, and it can reignite your spiritual imagination, which is what I experienced when I kind of cracked it open and was like, oh man, like I didn't even know like that was an option,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there are people who don't need to deconstruct. Like, it kind of depends on what parts we're talking about deconstructing. It's sort of like if you're raised hyper fundamentalist, then in order for you to be a healthy person, you have to deconstruct. There are elements of your faith that are going to be so toxic to you that you can stay in it and basically be miserable, or you can deconstruct. But our friend Tripp, for instance, was raised like liberal Baptist, and basically
That's a
whenever he
thing?
describes Tripp Fuller, sorry,
No, liberal Baptist.
yeah,
Trip
like
Fuller is a thing. Yeah.
American Baptist. His parents were church planners, and like when he describes his childhood, it's like, oh, that's exactly the way I want to raise my child. Like he ended up doing some deconstruction because he studied philosophy and he went down his own path. But someone raised in his shoes, I don't think necessarily would need to deconstruct that. Where it starts to get problematic for me is when somebody in your community growing up or whatever, or in college or at some point, starts to universalize the particular aspects of your faith tradition and say that that's the real one and judge everyone else by that measure. Once you do that, then you have to at least contextualize your faith and recognize it as part of a broader tradition, a broader spectrum on all kinds of different questions. Otherwise, you're basically being a bigot of some kind or another. So it's kind of like, yeah, there are people who don't need to, but most of us, it seems these days, and especially with the, just the massive ascendancy of white evangelical Christianity over the last 50 years in America, we are just seeing a huge population of people who I think mostly do have to come to terms with that, with a few exceptions where their particular church and family and whatever were just awesome. Other than those people, yeah, you got to go through some of it, but it's very variable what you have to go through, and it depends a lot on your personality and the specifics of your upbringing.
Yeah. So, and either one of you can answer this. So what went into deciding which topics actually made the flow chart for deconstruction? As I guess as it's related to this website specifically, because I think you could say you could deconstruct literally in anything and everything. So what kind of went into choosing these tents?
I think we were both in this world, right, Sarey? It wasn't like necessarily difficult to figure out what, I've got 3 podcasts under my belt. I know which episodes get clicked on the most. Sarey has been involved in all these academic conversations around these questions. I mean, let's say the top 10 at least were kind of no-brainers, probably.
Yeah, they just came right. Like there was some super obvious ones that were on the top of the list. And it's clear too, because I can look at the back end of our site and see what's getting clicked on. And it's like, yeah, okay, we were right, but we're still adding stuff. That's the thing about the site too. The site's still being changed and added to. And actually that was one of the reasons I listened to your recent conversation with Brad Jerzak, was because someone emailed me and said, I'm deconstructing from a strongly charismatic background. And me and my sister, we have questions about demons and Satan. And like, we need resources on this. So I'm like, hold my beer. And I just like started doing a little research, and, that was one that I sent to her.
Yeah. So Sarey right now is working on a new topic around sort of demons, Satan, the spiritual realm. Yeah. And I just worked on one that just went up last week around religious and spiritual abuse, because that's what I'm studying as part of my dissertation. And so we're adding as we go, as people kind of bring things up that we recognize there are holes in the site.
Yeah. Or stuff's like a broad umbrella that we might break up into categories,
right,
as things go along.
What's been the one that you've been like, God, I can't find any, I'm struggling to find really good resources, and I should add these? Like, has there been one where you're like, God, that's a great question. It should be deconstructed, and I don't know where to point you. Have you come up against that, either one of you?
I have a question that I get asked all the time for the podcast and would also put on the site, which is, how do I navigate my family relationships around conspiracy theories? And there's just, some people have some ideas. I found a few good articles, and I've been trying to interview, one of those authors maybe. None of that's faith-based. It's all just general psychology around talking to conspiratorial folks. That is like the freshest wound right now, I think, in our little subculture of sort of former evangelicals, is like, oh my gosh, what do I do with like when my dad likes QAnon, or like that's fresh and not so clear to me. Sarey, do you have an idea? Not about, sorry, not do you have an idea of how to solve that? Do you have a question?
No, I know.
You're also
no.
What's the answer, Sarey?
Gosh, for me, I guess what just came to mind was certain types of resources that I wish existed. Like, sometimes people do have like an intellectual problem they need to solve, and sometimes they just need to hear other people tell their stories and to feel like not alone. Like, I was raised being taught this, and so I I'm hoping. Sometimes I wish there was more, personal testimonies, people telling their own stories of deconstruction.
Hmm.
So just so people could hear and feel, feel that kinship, feel less alone.
Yeah.
Am I
Was I the only
hearing the
one who was taught? Yeah.
Am I hearing the
Go ahead.
genesis of some original SoYourDeconstructing.com content in your voice here, Sari?
It could be.
Just the
It could
beginnings of an
be.
idea?
It could be. Might have to make my
So
yeah.
I want to piggyback on that because I've had a thought for a while, and a lot of it is, so I'm going to have to preface this a bit. So I get disgusted with myself often when I see my own Facebook memories, because I've had Facebook long enough that you had to like have a .edu and go to the right university to
Yeah.
have Facebook. And some of the things that I have said, I don't recognize myself anymore. And
Mm.
so I'm tempted, those are part of my story and they're valid. But especially when it deals with like religion and my politics and how those two are commingled, like I'm ashamed of it. Um, and I don't want it on the internet anymore.
Yeah.
And
Do you delete
so,
it?
no, I hide it, but it's still there. There's a button that says, "Don't let anybody but me see this." It leaves the Facebook. But I'm curious, in a world of deconstructing, and especially on social media where we're all so isolated and insular, where you say the one wrong thing from 15 years ago, and I'm not allowed to grow apparently, and neither are you, Sarah, and neither are you, Dan. Like, how does someone safely deconstruct on the internet, I guess is what I'm asking,
Mm.
because and come to grips with the past that they've also put on the internet.
That's an interesting question. I mean, it probably only applies to public figures in the kind of strict kind of cancel culture sense. Like,
Hmm.
well, I guess I don't know, and I don't know a lot about that topic. I know there have been court cases around like just regular, like a cheerleader or something, and a court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court or whatever, to play on, like a team or something like that. But I think for the average person, no one is really holding our old Facebook posts against us. I haven't had anybody do that. Although I did have a very interesting. We don't have to spend time on this, but I had a like almost like one of those Berenstain Bears things where I was like I had a couple people very close to me say that they thought that I became affirming of homosexuality like a couple years ago, and my recollection is that it was when I was like 23 or something, like 14 years ago, and I had to kind of litigate this, and I had to like call the drummer of Sherwood and like okay, and then call my dad and like like am I misremembering this? Like, do you remember these conversations we had, Dad? Like when I was about this age. Anyway, I was able to work it out, but like that was like the only experience I could think of where someone actually brought something like that up, and I disagreed, or it had some import. So I'm not sure. I guess I haven't. I maybe should be more worried about it as some sort of public figure than I am. I don't know.
Huh.
It's hard. I mean, I don't think the internet is a safe space,
Mhm.
to deconstruct, and but nor are most like IRL social spaces. Like it's a discernment process for sure. And we have a section called communities on our site where we indicate some like private Facebook groups or chat groups or Slack groups or whatever where people are deconstructing together. And I think Dan, I think you do a pretty good job of your patron group on Facebook of keeping it pretty safe where people seem pretty
Yeah.
open to share.
People
But
are also willing to participate in that. It's not all on me, but yeah.
right. No, and people are doing a pretty good job in there. But yeah, I mean, I totally sympathize with what you're saying, Seth, because I even thinking of things I said in rooms with groups of, 15 people 10 years ago, I think back to stuff I said and I feel that like hot shame chest feeling,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
the reason I ask is, so a few months ago, before the election, from like 6 years ago, so this would have been when I think older than that. So when Romney was running, I had said something,
2012. Yeah.
and I've I've been told that I have a way to be very cutting with my words. I don't know if that's true because I don't think I write all that well, but other people sometimes do. And so someone shared something that I had tagged them in, and it's my voice. and I disagree with it 180%. And then I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like, I don't know that I can take that down, because how bad does that look? You know what I mean?
Right.
But I also was like, everybody can see this, and that is not who I am anymore. And then I had a lot of people asking me questions privately, which was fine, but exhausting. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is not fun.
Hmm.
This is, you know what I mean? I don't know. It's a weird question, and not necessarily entirely directly related to the
Well,
website, but
it's, but I think there's a way. I wanted to share something that Mark Karras, who is a past and upcoming guest on You Have Permission, 2 different episodes. In his book, Religious Refugees, he's also a therapist. So
mhm,
his book comes from research he's done of the available literature, but also just experience with clients going through faith change. And he calls it an unholy huddle. This is his term for like, this is one of the necessary factors for growth through this experience is you need a huddle of a handful of people that are safe to talk about this stuff with. And I bet if you asked him, I didn't ask him this at the time, he would say this should be as offline as possible. You know, in
hmm,
terms of like definitely thinking through a therapeutic lens of like who's this safe person or these safe people. You know, this is not something you want to be performative. It's not something about your personal brand. This is like a truly for you and your friendships, space, a safe place to process all of this. And depending on where you live in the country, who your community is constituted of, that can be either quite easy to find a few people who are safe like that, or it can be very difficult to find. And maybe it has to be online because there is nobody in your rural Arkansas
Yep.
town that you could talk about this with, especially then there's the COVID thing as well. But um, yeah, that it just made me think of that. And that seems to me very wise,
hmm,
a very wise thing to include in the sort of plan toward health.
yeah. Yeah, I have Mark's book. I haven't read it, though. I will say his Divine Echoes book was formative in the way that I approach prayer.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read that book, either of you,
I
but
haven't
it is.
read I haven't read either of them. I read enough of I I often peruse books and highlight stuff that I want to talk about and look at. I read intros and outros and chapter titles and skim the stuff that I'm curious about. I mean, I'm in school. I don't have time. I don't have time to read any book I want to read basically right now. So,
But you
that's
have
life.
time for the holy fun.
I have time to listen to music. Yeah, I mean, I got an 11-month-old. Music's on all day. We're just hanging out. The
Yeah,
balance of how much literature or nonfiction I consume to how much new music I consume has shifted massively since having a kid. It's like, and in school, I'm sure is a part of that too. I tons of music, so that's been actually really great.
the best part though, Dan, is when your kids get older and you introduce them to like Weezer and that type of stuff, and they're thrilled by it. And so
Oh,
now, like, my kids will be like, Alexa, play Weezer, and I'm like, please
oh.
God, don't do it. Okay, good, it's
Just the
asleep.
first two albums, though.
Well, they
No,
only
I
know.
I go deeper. I go deeper.
Well,
I,
they
I
got
wouldn't
that
say
Not
that.
song from
me.
Frozen. The entry point there was Frozen
Oh
too.
Good,
my
good.
Yeah.
gosh.
What's
Whatever it
funny is when we
takes.
watched that in the theaters, in the back of my mind, I was like, why does this sound like a Weezer song? And then when the soundtracks came at the end, I'm like, because they freaking wrote the song, because they've
Yeah.
got like a voice. But
Oh yeah.
so Sarey,
I'm a
I want
purist and that horrifies me.
to.
You'll get
Let's.
over it.
It's no Rob Zombie. um, so
Pinkerton all the way.
so um so the part of your website that I spent the most time digging into is the spiritual practices, because there's been
Yeah.
one
Ooh.
practice that I've done for about 2 years now, because of a book that I read, um, the Examine, and it's been, I do it every day, um,
Yeah.
and but I'm curious, as y'all put those together, that's my favorite part of the whole website, because I think that those practices and making new disciplines is extremely important for somebody that's deconstructing.
Yes.
Because for me, I was like, well, now I don't know what to do. Like, I can't go to
Yes.
church. I don't
Hmm.
know how to freaking pray, and I don't know what to do. Do I
Yes.
hold my hands? What, so can either of you talk a bit about the practices section, kind of what went into it, what's impactful for y'all in it? Because I think that is
You're so
arguably as
good because
important as a dogma.
I was sitting here. Sorry to interrupt you. I was sitting here being like, how do we pivot to practices? Because I really want to talk about them. But you did it. But I think it was a big part for both of us. It's a big deal for both of us. Dan, why don't you talk about?
Well, let me motivate a little bit from what I understand of the psychology research on why you had that experience, Seth, and why so many of us do, especially for those of us who have had some kind of legitimate trauma that exits us out of a religious community, be that, oftentimes it's a controlling pastor or some sort of controlling group within a church, and then, family rifts and all kinds of stuff. We can then associate that pain with the practices. Or, for instance, even if you don't have any trauma, for me, it's like if someone goes, Father God, like I immediately know, like I'm transported back to a certain specific time in my evangelical upbringing. And if I associate that church and that whatever with bad things, with really not Christ or whatever, then I'm, triggered is maybe a strong word for that, but we can, the well can be poisoned quite easily if we've had bad experiences. And so one thing that's cool about finding spiritual practices, it is cool that they're older in a lot of cases. Many of these are hundreds of years old. But even if they weren't, even if they're just different, is like, oh, I don't have any associations with the Examen. Yeah. Or with, I had no associations when I started doing centering prayer. And the book that was the big one for me is the fourth item on the list on the website, Experiencing the Depths of Jesus Christ by Madame Guyon, and who's a 1800s French nun. And like, just to have no baggage is itself powerful. To just, especially if you're raised Christian, everything has baggage. It has your whole life and family and your friendships and your adolescence, and all that stuff is tied up in it. And so I just think that's interesting to kind of motivate why that stuff can be so powerful. Sarey, but you could be a little more autobiographical with your own story.
Yeah. I mean, cracking open spiritual practices for me started with mindfulness, but I was, and around the same time I started to read about more Eastern Orthodox prayer practices too. So I would do sort of a hybrid thing where I would practice mindfulness and then like pick like one verse or phrase from a verse to meditate on, and it just cracked open a lot of just experiencing God, from what I could tell, from what I could experience. And I started to loosen my grip on a lot of things that, like, well, all of these spiritual practices are pretty much lost on like contemporary evangelicalism. So it was new, it was fresh, and it was moving my anchor of spirituality from just like getting all the facts right to a more lived, embodied experience of God. And that ended up being really, I don't know, it's just a real pivot for me, because prior to that, it had been all about getting the facts straight, getting doctrine right. And once you tooled around with that well enough, then you were kind of good with God. It totally reoriented me and my faith.
Yeah. So tongue-in-cheek question and then a legitimate question. So, and I only thought of this, Dan, because of what you said. So when you say Father God in a prayer, like I'm immediately transported to 13-year-old youth group or whatever. But I am curious the correlation of the amount of Father Gods to the prayer coming true. How many do you think that is, like a percentage of the prayer? What, 30%, 50%?
I think it's inverse. I think that the more Father Gods you put in, the clearer it is that you're just riffing and don't know what to pray in a public performance setting.
But like, want to sound good and authoritative. Exactly. Like some folks throw that in like every other word, man. Like it's bad.
Yes. Yeah. To where you don't even know what the prayer is anymore. You're just 1, 2, 3, 5, 26, 32. Yeah.
I want to actually, can I add a very brief biographical detail on the spiritual practices thing
Yeah.
before we move on?
Mhm.
Just that for me, the way it worked out in my story was 6, 7 years ago or so when I started doing centering prayer. Not everybody, people have very different experiences, but my experience was like immediate of God's overwhelming, joyful, and accepting presence. And I wasn't able to admit to myself that I'm a liberal Christian. I just am. Like, I'm a Christian, I follow Jesus, but my ideas that make sense to me, the theological concepts that make sense to me, are the ones that liberal Christians believe. They're the ones I would find in an Episcopal church, not the ones I would find in a Calvary chapel. And I couldn't actually admit that to myself, probably out of anxiety of being wrong and being in God's bad graces or something, until I felt that overwhelming assurance of God's love for me. And I say that not everybody experiences that because I've had friends that I early on in those days I was like, well, this is the answer. And I would try and get them to experience it, and they would try, and not all of them would have that experience. And some of them did. Sarey and I have talked, and we've had quite similar experiences, but I have many friends that didn't have those. And so I don't like to say that I don't want to push that as like a fundamental part of the journey. But for me, it was completely tied to some of the more abstract stuff that now I'm free to discuss on the podcast and put together this list with Sarey and chat with my liberal theologian friends. You know, all of that stuff came after I knew I was loved. And actually, after that experience, a lot of the personal relationship kind of conversion experience language of my youth as an evangelical made more sense to me after I directly experienced God and realized I was a liberal. That's one of the great ironies.
That's actually what I was
my
going to
story.
say as you were retelling that story was like as a young kid, the Jesus story and the concept of God's love really ignited my sense of like imagination and beauty. And over the years, like it sort of got zapped away. And then, yeah, the spiritual practice made sense to me, make sense to me again.
Yeah. And well, everyone's been autobiographical except for me. So I will say for myself,
good.
like I don't ever get autobiographical. I can't even say the word on my own podcast.
You got to. Your listeners need to know who it is they're listening to.
I think we've established that the things that I say on the internet are not really worthwhile. But I will say when I make more time for new spiritual practices, like I find that I grow a lot in uncomfortability, but like I have to commit personally for like at least a year to do something, because for the first 3 months, I don't know what the freak I'm doing and I don't know what to expect. You know what I mean? Yeah, but that's just me.
Yeah.
It's really hard to foster discipline.
Oh gosh,
it comes
awful.
it's really hard.
I have barely prayed in 11 months since my son was born. I mean, I pray like through spending time with him, but my actual discipline of practice has, I mean, it's plummeted like never before.
In the toilet with the baby. Yeah.
Well, and this is a bit tongue in cheek, but so I would try with my first child, because Dan, this is your first child, right? And
First kid,
Sarey,
Me
this is your
too,
first
yeah.
child as well. So on my first child, I tried to do the thing where I would stay awake when my wife would be feeding, my son when we were, at home.
Yeah.
And I would often get caught not staying awake, and I would be praying every single time. That was my excuse every single time as to why my head was bowed and my eyes were closed. So I would encourage you to pray in that way.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really get you off the hook, and everybody knows that you're lying. And even worse about prayer, but whatever. That was my excuse, and I'll still do it today, because you can't. What are you going to do? You threw the Jesus card in there. So, what has the feedback been? So, how long has the website even been up? When did it go? When did it become a thing?
October-ish or something. It went live, right?
Yeah, but I
It's like
kind
a
of think
soft launch.
When did we do Trips podcast? Because that's when I feel like it really like
a month and a half, 2 months ago that we actually did a little launch party on Homebrewed Christianity.
Right.
And that was kind of when we.
So the reason
prior to that, we were just sending it to friends and just soliciting feedback from people we trusted.
Seth, you were an early feedback.
You were one of the
solicitor.
Yeah, I remember saying something. I don't remember what I said. I hope it was helpful. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. So the reason I ask is when I look at everything there, just at a glance, I can see one of two things happening. People saying, thank you for putting this together and for the effort. because again, there's nowhere to click support the thing. At least I didn't see it at the time. Or you're either going to get, thank you for putting all this heresy on the internet for you to corrupt my children.
Oh my
Oh, I
gosh.
think this is
Those
actually
would-
the time for Sarey to share our first hate mail, and it did not
We got our
come
first.
from where you would think it would have come from.
Really?
We've got our first hate email, only one so far.
Yeah,
Sarey,
most
tell us about it.
people have been like, this is so helpful.
Mm.
Thank you so much. This is amazing. First piece of hate mail we got was an email with the subject line, "You're part of the problem."
All caps.
And it was so, yeah, and it actually was all lowercase, which made it even more scary.
Yeah, that's
Um,
scary, yeah. Like whispering.
No,
"You're
but it,
part of the problem."
but it was just someone who thought that just Christianity was altogether inherently evil. And
Yeah, progressive Christianity is not, in this person's opinion, is not better. It is just like, it's worse because it enables Christianity to survive longer, and Christianity is itself the problem from this
Right.
guy's perspective. And I was like, wow, I mean, that is I don't think in 100 years I would have guessed that would be the first piece of hate mail we receive. We assumed
interesting, right?
it would be from, conservative folks or whatever, saying we're leading
Yeah.
people astray.
People astray,
Yeah.
which
I mean,
it's coming.
I get that argument, I guess. I can see where somebody would make that argument.
If we ever get a write-up, on Gospel Coalition or something, I'm sure we'll get plenty of those emails, but that would be well
would
worth
love
it.
I mean,
I
I
would
can
love
can submit it as a request. I'm sure there's a please write about this. No, I
That would
won't
be
do it.
great. I'm lacing up my gloves, my theological gloves.
Well, I mean, yeah, we tried to put diversity on there. I mean, like we tried to put in any given category kind of a range of some, more moderate, more
I would
conservative.
for almost every topic, there is something like a Tim Keller, Tim Mackey Bible Project,
NT Wright.
NT Wright. There's something like a sort of centrist view. For that language doesn't work as well for theology as it does for politics, but like a taking the scholarship seriously, but certainly theologically orthodox. There is at least one or two of the 15 or so topics. I mean, 12 or 13 of them. And then it gets to more, there's also stuff that is further left. But so it is not like only a list of liberal theology or progressive theology. It doesn't only contain that. That's not the point. The point is for people to find where they're at and see if they are supposed to be shifting a bit one direction or the other. The goal is not, like I say on the intro of Your Permission, the goal is not to make liberal converts. This is this is a resource to find where you're at. And if you're here, if you've come to this website, you feel some need to be moving, and find yourself and go from there.
Yeah, fair. So we're coming close to the end of the time. I've asked this to everybody, and I'm not going to stop because I really enjoyed it. It doesn't matter. Here we go. So I've been asking everyone, when you say, here's what God is, like you give words to that, what is that? And so in no particular order, whoever wants to go, what is that?
Thanks for the heads up, Seth, on a question like that.
I gave
the questions,
people
what is God?
Yeah, who, what? I mean, give it word. It doesn't matter. Like there's not really a right or wrong answer, right? I mean, maybe there's not. I don't know.
Well, I'll start, Sarey. I'll give you some time, but you have to know that I'm doing this a little bit.
What does Brett Jerzak say? Just kidding.
Quickly, Siri. By the way, Sarey, anytime I say your name out loud, my phone.
I
goes,
know.
"Huh?" Everybody says that too. Okay. So I think these days I would I don't spend a lot of time thinking about this, but I would be, for now anyway, a panentheist, which is the idea that everything in the universe is within God, but God is also more than the universe. So to say something like God is sustaining the universe would be to put it mildly from where I'm coming from. Everything is within God, all of us. Not that we are all little Jesuses in a kind of a new agey way, but rather that everything is shot through with God's love and intention and lure and directionality in some way. And so God is both everything in the universe, and God is the thing drawing the universe closer to, and us and everything in it, closer to love, harmony, closer to the kingdom of heaven, where the lion and the lamb can lay down to a non-combative, non-coercive existence of some sort or another, which, if it comes to pass, I have no real language for, because I can't imagine it, given the world that I experience, other than through metaphors like the holy mountain in Isaiah that Jesus quotes, and all that kind of stuff. That's my answer. I don't really like the answer. It feels unsatisfying. Maybe just in the presentation.
Well, I will say, so I have personally learned more about the character of God from asking this question to like 60 people than some of the books that I've read.
Wow, that's
which
cool.
is why I don't give people any preface of the question, because I don't like that planned answer, because I just don't feel like it's as authentic. But maybe that's just me.
I did my best to make it sound like it was planned.
Yeah, well, you did great.
Okay, Sarey, your time is up. You have to answer now.
God is a loving spirit who sees me and knows me and is calling all people and things to God's self. And that's the best I can do right now.
That's good.
That's perfectly fine. All right, so point people to the places. What door do they open to get into the So You're Deconstructing headspace, and then where do they go? Like, if they went one place first when they got there, where would you direct people to click?
Oh, that's good. Well, actually, one of the pages we haven't talked about that would be a good place to start is the testimonies page. And that is pretty straightforward. I just did a call out to all the You Have Permission Facebook group folks and had them answer this question of, like, describe for me what it was like going through your own deconstruction process. And then I categorized 50 or 60 or so of these.
That's a job.
Things by topic. It wasn't that hard. And so on the testimonies page, you can click on any of these feelings or experiences like fear, self-doubt, loneliness, disorientation, deeper connection to faith, excitement, anger, and read the real life blurbs, basically, from people who have gone through this themselves. I actually think that's a cool place to start on the website. And just to kind of feel like, oh, I'm not alone. And you'll inevitably recognize some of that language as something that you're going through, whether or not you have the words for that yet.
Yeah. So the website is soyourdeconstructing.com. I think you buried that, so I'll say it for you. But
it's free. We've said it a lot of times. There's no Patreon or whatever. It's just a free resource. Some of the communities that we list do cost some money to be in. Some of them are like patron communities, for instance, like the You Have Permission one, but some of them are not. There are some free digital communities to be a part of. Even there's some that are run by licensed mental health professionals and stuff like that. So it's really not, there's no really commerce angle here. It's just a resource.
Yeah, I will say, so I have a community for this podcast, although this podcast is not in my community. Like, I don't proselytize this podcast there. I very rarely actually post things there, but it's a form of church for me. I really enjoy everything that goes on there. So if people are listening, find a community. Those are at least a safe place community. There's some ones that are not all that safe.
Yeah, maybe we should add your. We should probably add.
Yeah, I was gonna say, should we add your group?
You can if you want.
Now.
That's not an advertisement, but you can if you want. But it is protected, and you'd have to answer some questions. And one of the questions is, like, if you produce content, you're not going to post it here, and that also applies to me. So I play by my own rules there. So well, thank you both so much for coming on and spending time away from your 1-year-olds with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it, and we hope we can be helpful to folks.
Yeah. Good deal. All right, so I'll end that there, and I'll end this here.